English 373, week 3, part 6. So I want to say one more thing about images really quick. Did you ever see tourists in New York who are heading down the subway, and there's all those signs about the changes for the trains, and they're like, this train isn't running, it's skipping these stops on these days, and this train is skipping these stops on these days, and this train is now, the F is running on a 6 line, and it's like a lot of them. There's like 6 or 7 individual posters for the slight changes to different trains on different days. Now, when you are in a hurry to catch your train, because you live in New York, and you would run down the stairs and you'd see all the subway posters, you can figure out immediately, you're like, that one has nothing to do with me. Oh, nope, that has to do with me. Okay, here I go. Instead of getting on the Q, I'm going to get on the R. But you ever see tourists who sit there and they read all the signs because they don't know what's important and what's not? That's what training your mind to understand things is. As a New Yorker, and you understand those signs quickly, but if you're not used to it, it's very confusing. So in the old days, they were really used to words and they found them less confusing, but they found images confusing because they didn't see them very often. And in our case, we're much better at images and not as good at words. It's just sort of, you don't realize how trained you are to understand things. And teachers often treat students like they're stupid because it's not that students are stupid, it's just they know different things. One time one time a teacher was complaining. She asked her students to write down something they were good at, and one of her students wrote that she was really good at makeup, and the teacher was like, "Oh, that's so embarrassing. Like, get interested in something real and something important. Makeup, like that's just ridiculous." And I was like, "What are you talking about? Like, makeup is fucking hard to do. That's also a job you can get, putting makeup on people for important days and for movie shoots and also." Makeup is about beauty. What are we, against beauty now? Go fuck yourself. Anyway, putting on makeup is a real skill. It counts. It's just that, so some people go, oh, these people are smart and these people are dumb. But usually what they mean is the people you call dumb, they're just good at a bunch of shit you don't care about because you're an asshole. Anyway, let's get back to my favorite line of Shakespeare. I love it so much. Okay. Oh, I'm not even going to talk about food, but I mean, just please imagine that the medieval peasants just ate you know, turnips and beef, and they've never had Skittles before. You know what I mean? Like, there's so many candy options, there's so many crazy flavors that you have from all over the world that they never have. Okay, whatever. So here's the line again. Here lay Duncan, his silver skin laced with his golden blood, and his gashed stabs look like a breach in nature for ruin's wasteful entrance. It looks, for starters, like a relatively simple sentence. It's a metaphor because he says his silver skin laced with his golden blood. His skin is not really silver. His blood is not really golden. It's just that he's the king. And so we're going to compare his blood to gold and his skin to silver. Again, this idea that blood is sort of shiny and metallic like gold, and silver is kind of pale like the skin of a Scottish person, and whatever. But they're valuable because the king's life is more valuable than an ordinary person's life. And so it's like his skin is like silver, his blood is like gold. Pretty basic. Not super interesting there. Here lay Duncan, his silver skin laced with his golden blood, and his gashed stabs look like a breach in nature for ruin's wasteful entrance. Again, it has a relatively simple meaning. He has gashes, his gashed stabs, because he was killed with a knife, stabbed over and over and over and over again. His gashed stabs looked like a breach in nature for ruin's wasteful entrance. So a breach is like a rip or a tear. If you've seen the first Avengers movie, there's like a hole in the sky and aliens are pouring out of it. It's very much that kind of thing. The image is like that. The word nature is being used in an unusual way that you're not used to. You sort of know what it means, but you need a little bit of help with it because it's the people in the Renaissance use the word nature to mean something else. And people that took English 250 with me will know this already because I give this speech all the time. But the word nature meant something different back then. The word nature there means reality. The word nature in the Renaissance means reality. We usually think of nature as meaning rocks and trees and waterfalls and bees and shit, and it does mean that, but they use it to be bigger than that. They also mean the stars, the heavens, the sky, the planets. That's all nature. It's like what God made. And so as opposed to art, which is things like couches and novels and video games, right? Those are man-made. The given reality that God put here, that's nature. And so they use it to mean reality. We do talk like that sometimes. You will occasionally hear people, if you have a problem, if you go see a doctor, sometimes the doctor will say something like, "And what is the nature of the problem?" What is the reality of the problem? We'll talk about natural law like gravity. Um, so nature means reality. Okay. Here lay Duncan, his silver skin laced with his golden blood, and his gashed stabs look like a breach in nature for ruin's wasteful entrance. So his stab wounds look like, it's a metaphor. We're going to compare the stab wounds to something. The stab wounds look like a breach in nature. His stab wounds remind Macbeth of a hole in reality. Whew, that's interesting. Breach means hole. Nature means reality. It's a hole in reality. What's coming out of that hole? Ruin's wasteful entrance. That's interesting. His stab wounds look like a hole from which ruin and destruction is pouring forth. Again, that image in Avengers of all the aliens. There's like a tear in the sky to another dimension. And all these aliens are pouring into the world, destroying everything. Macbeth says that Duncan's gashed stabs look like a breach in nature for ruin's wasteful entrance. His stab wounds look like a hole, look like holes in reality. What's coming out of that hole is ruin and waste pouring into the world. This is important to grasp because it's worth remembering that we think of the king as sort of like a politician, like a president who gets to be president forever. Um, and that very powerful president, I guess, but the king is sort of, we think of the king as being a political figure. Um, you got to remember, and in Shakespeare's day, they mostly thought about the king as a political figure. Nowadays, kings don't really do a whole lot. But remember that we lived in the 2000s, and Shakespeare lived in the 1600s, and Macbeth lived in the 1200s. So the king there, in the 1200s, the king is God's appointed representative on earth. So murdering the king is not like a regular murder. It's you gotta the horror of this moment, Macduff's horror when he's running around screaming at people that terrible things have happened and the king is murdered. It's not just a, oh my God, our leader has been assassinated. It's not like that. It's not like JFK getting murdered. It's more like the Pope or Jesus has been murdered, because the Pope and Jesus are like God's representatives on earth. So this is an attack on the foundations of civilization. This isn't just some guy who died and we're going to get his son to be king next. It's that the king is supposed to be God's representative on earth. It's why, actually, I'm going to see if I can go back a page and get the, Macduff really freaks out about it. Hold on a second. Sorry, I'm looking for something. Give me just 10 seconds to find it. Oh yeah, Macduff's reaction when he finds this on top of page 8. Confusion now hath made his masterpiece. Most sacrilegious murder hath broke ope the Lord's anointed temple and stole thence the life of the building. And he really freaks out, countenance this horror. He's really like losing his mind over this, because it really is like killing God's representative on earth. Actually, some of you guys know anime really well. Do you know Princess Mononoke? It's a little like that scene where they assassinate I'm not remembering this movie too well, but there's like an elk god in the woods, and this woman, they shoot him with a gun, and it is like the end of the fucking world. I mean, these little tree sprites start falling down, and it's like it's almost like a nuclear explosion in a movie where that takes place long before you'd have guns just got invented. But it's a fucking cool moment. This is like that. Killing the king is like that level of wrong. So it's an incredible. Here lay Duncan, his silver skin laced with his golden blood, and his gashed stabs. It's a metaphor. We're going to compare his stab wounds to holes in reality. And what's coming out of those holes are ruin and waste pouring into the world and destroying everything. I hope that you remember the porter describing, it's like, he compares opening the door of the castle, where the king is dead, but nobody knows yet. He compares opening the door of the castle to opening the gates of hell. it is actually a little bit like opening the gates of hell. And the movie very nicely ends with a very hellish scene of the woods on fire, which is not in the play, but I think it looks fucking cool. Anyway, I am not even halfway done talking about this line yet. I'll pick it up in the next video. I'm just getting more.